Hello, everybody. Welcome and good morning. This is day 2 of the EPALE Community Conference, and we're calling it this year Skills for the Future Bloom. And we hope you're going to be sending us your images and your ideas that would be inspired by the idea of blooming. And this is to recognize the transformation that happens when adult education comes into people's lives. I'm Tamsin Rose, and I have the great pleasure of being our moderator today. And we've got a fantastic program today, but let me just recap the things we discussed yesterday. We had a keynote that helped us to understand more about artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies, for example, neurotechnology. We talked about how the difference between the organic, our physical bodies, and the external world technology, those barriers are breaking down, and that increasingly we're seeing technology that's implanted in the body that might be things in the brain that are designed to help people with epilepsy or with Parkinson's. But more in a more sinister way, we're starting to understand that some of this technology helps us understand what people are thinking. Now, for people who have physical disabilities, the ability to use their thoughts to, say, move their wheelchair may be an amazing breakthrough. But what if a government could see what you were thinking? So you can see why we had a really interesting conversation about the needs for an ethical framework. But we heard from our keynote speaker that 60 countries around the world have produced a legal framework around AI, and that's a start, but it's far from being enough to really understand what the implications of these new technologies will be. And after our keynote speech, we then had a panel that helped us to understand how technology and other changes are updating the way we think about skills. And we understood that the sort of former concept of learning being classroom based, people sitting down and learning about skills in a sort of long program, is very much changing. We learned that skills may be broken down into smaller parts. They may be integrated holistically into someone's working day rather than a separate working day training. We also heard about the research that's emerging to understand what happens to people if they lose their job, if a plant or a factory closes and a whole sector disappears. And we heard about some of the challenges that can be to either reskill, how much time it takes to invest in getting some new skills. What happens if you're forced to downskill, take a job that doesn't represent your skills? And we heard about the long-term impact on life chances and on your earning potential. And really, we heard from the European Commission some of the policy frameworks that they've put in place to try and address that. And we got a lot of comment. We had over 1,000 people watching us yesterday across our different platforms. And thank you for your questions, your ideas, and your comments. And I'd just like to highlight a couple of the comments that we had from people watching our broadcast yesterday. So Gianluca had a comment. He said, okay, how could AI support autonomous exploration of knowledge? And this ability of AI to interact like a bot in a human-like way could mean there's lots of different ways of interacting. We talked about the fact that there aren't enough teachers and not enough capacity to provide further education and training to everyone. But what if AI could make it easier? What if you could increase that capacity and make it possible in a number of different ways? We talked about the possibility of truly individualized, tailored programs for individuals enabled by AI, rather than thinking that AI will replace things, that it would support activities. Dora was quite positive. She thinks, in terms of skills, I think we've got a lot to gain from AI because we'd have this individualized support. So each person could get something, a whole program that's tailored to their needs, their ambitions, what they want to do in life. Yana gave us a sort of a cautionary note to say, look, the issue of access to technology is important because we highlighted that, for example, on the African continent, only half the population has access to energy, let alone telecommunications and the internet. And she said, yes, that is important, but the issue of basic literacy is also more important. We heard yesterday that about half of the citizens of the EU don't have functional digital literacy to allow them to engage in a world that's increasingly digitally supported. And finally, another comment, we had a message from Ivan who said, wish it's far too soon to be putting AI in levels of education. And by the way, he also challenged us that AI, artificial intelligence, is not really intelligent. What artificial intelligence models that we have at the moment is they take information that we've generated at a large scale. they chop it down, analyze it, and refeed it back to us. It's not necessarily generating anything new or creative or intelligent. So thank you for that message, Ivan. Keep your comments coming in. It really helps to take our conversation further. So let me just tell you what we're going to be covering today. If yesterday we were looking at artificial intelligence and its impact on skills, today we're going to be focusing on the big issues of democracy. As you all know, next June, the European Parliament elections will be held, and that's direct elections, and about 300 million adults in the EU will have a vote. But what about disinformation? What about misinformation, propaganda? And we already have seen deep fakes out there. So how can people know what's being communicated to them? How can we ensure the integrity of the elections? So if you're concerned about that, don't worry, we've got you covered. That's going to be as part of our panel discussion later this morning. So we've got a great program for you. Just a couple of reminders of our process. I know you're either watching us on the EPALE platform or on social media. If you're on the EPALE platform, in order to send us questions and comments, you need to be logged in. For those of you who are watching us on Twitter or on YouTube or on Facebook or LinkedIn, you're able to write the comments there. And all of that gets collected together and sent to me, the moderator, so I can share that with our speakers. We really encourage you to use two hashtags. That's Bloom with EPALE and the European Year of Skills. And we're interested in your ideas, your pictures, your selfies, your notes, anything that you want to share with us, anything that's inspired you, provoked you, anything that you think this is really worth talking about more or commenting in more detail. We also have a mobile app for EPALE, and you can download it for both Android and iOS users, and that allows you the full functionality to find out more about the whole EPALE community. And as a reminder, we've got more than 135,000 people part of that community, posting every day, sharing what their experiences are, their challenges, their case studies. So it's a really lively community that you can be part of. The European EPALE Community Conference isn't just the plenary sessions that we organise. There's a whole range of national side events, and we're delighted that there are 11 side events being organised as part of these next few days. And there are some that are coming up later today, and we'll have a chance to hear about them. But we say a warm congratulations to the NSS that have organised either joint screenings of this conference, but also their own workshops. And just to let you know, we have a workshop later this morning on the similar themes that we're talking about, which is on skills for citizenship, democratic education for a democratic society. And tomorrow there's one on empowering vulnerable groups through non-formal education. And they've been so popular that they're full now, those workshops, but they are going on, and we welcome that. Just wanted to let you know about a new feature that we've got on the EPALE platform that we are trialing at the moment. It's called My Community with Badges. We told you about it yesterday. The idea is that the more that you interact, the more you can earn badges that show that you're a more active member of the community. And this allows you to share your news, your blog posts, your videos, your messages, and all of that feeds into that community of co-learning that we're building up amongst our EPALE communities. And here you can see we've got a little video to show you. You can have, the more you contribute, the more badges that you get. And so people see that you're a trusted member, you're a very active member, and we can also see who our most active members are. And we'd like you all to go for the Gold Cup to be a real community hero for us. If you're new on EPALE, and we know we're growing, so there's some of you who are new users, we have developed 2 new video tutorials which help you to get the best out of the platform. The first one helps you through partner search. We had announced yesterday from the Commission that there's a new Erasmus Plus call for proposals that's opening soon. Well, what if you want to put in a project? How do you find a partner? If you want to do something with a particular country, how do you find someone else with the same interests or concerns that you have? Well, we've got a partner search tool on the EPALE website, and we've created a brand new video to help you understand how to use it best so that you can get a good partner search going. And the second video we've created is, how do you post your content? Let's say you've run an activity, you want to share the materials you developed for your own courses and you want to share that with others. We've developed a little video to show you how you post it, how you use it, how you tag it, so that people can find it and use it themselves. So please make use of these facilities and tools that we've put at your disposals. So I'm really excited to say that we are going to be contacting now. We're going to make contact with Finland. because, as I said, several different national support services are holding activities. And today we've got colleagues from Finland joining us. They're joining us, and I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce it well, but I'll try. They're joining us from Jyväskylä. So that's Katalini Kivi. Hello, Katalina.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Greetings from Finland, the city of Jyväskylä. You said it almost correctly.
Jyväskylä.
Well done.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
So just tell us a little bit what you're going to be doing today.
First of all, thank you for the interesting conference yesterday. It was very nice, and we are very curious and looking forward to hear more about the themes of today. So we are watching the live stream from the big screen here in Jyväskylä, and we have a room full of people here. So yeah, the weather is rainy, but fresh and autumn weather as usual at this time in Finland. And yeah, we like to wish everyone an inspiring conference day.
Thank you very much. And before we go, let's see everyone waving. Thank you very much. Lovely to see you, Finland. We'll catch up with you again. Bye.
Bye.
So that was the guess. We just made a connection. And we like to do that during the community conference, just so that you can see some of the communities that are being created in national environments to take these ideas and build on them, discuss them, and take them further. So we're now ready to start with today's program. And we have a fantastic keynote speaker who's going to help us explore what is adult education? What's the value of it? What purpose does it solve? How does it link into the big issues of citizenship? And it's Professor Gert Biesta. And he's going to take us outside our comfort zone. He's going to investigate contemporary challenges and the possibilities for education and democracy. And he's got a strong commitment to defending the integrity of both education and the work of educators, beyond the agendas and the good intentions, to really understand how they're a fundamental part of a democracy. Gert, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Excellent. So you're a professor of public education at Maynooth University and a professor of educational theory and pedagogy at the University of Edinburgh. And it looks like I can see lovely sunlight coming in from your window. Is it a sunny day where you are?
It's a sunny day in Scotland, yes.
Excellent. Okay. So let's get straight into the topic, because we had this really great introduction where we were talking about the sort of technology changes and digital skills, and a reminder about inequalities and how we need to build on skills, including digital skills, for the future, because the world is changing. In your work, and you've and I encouraged participants to go away and sort of find out more about some of the papers that you've put out, but you said that education has three purposes. So qualification, socialization, and subjectification. Yes. So, first of all, it would be quite useful for you to help us understand those terms, and then how do they all come together? Why is it a three-legged stool that needs to work together?
Okay, I'll try that. So we hear a lot about the functions of education, the function of education for the economy, or the function for social cohesion. But that's very different from our angle as educators, because that has to do with what are the purposes we are after, what are the areas that we need to be concerned about. Again, there's a lot of language that says it's knowledge, skills, and dispositions, and that's all there is. And there is a lot of talk today at this conference also about skills, and that very much begins to narrow. So one thing I like to argue is that as educators, we actually have three concerns. We are concerned with the qualification of our students. That is indeed with giving them access to, you can say, knowledge and skills, but I prefer to talk about understanding and thoughtful action. That's a very important first task of education. And there we try to qualify our students that are able to do things. That can even lead to qualifications. But that's not our only job. We also have a very important job to do in, you can say, opening the world for our students, giving them a sense of direction, orientation, of all the traditions, cultures, practices and the values that are at stake there. We can call that socialization. We socialize them into these cultures and practices. I also like to think of it as providing our students with a sense of orientation, that you know where you are. If you become a nurse, you need to have a sense of what nursing is. If you become a baker, you need to have a sense of what baking is. If you become a citizen of a country, you need to have a sense of what that country is about. So that's the second important task. And then there is this third one, subjectification. Very strange word, but a very important one, because it's meant there to remind all of us that students are not objects that we just try to control and direct and steer and do things with, but that they are human beings, that they are subjects of their own life, that we all have freedom, and that we need to use our freedom wisely. And to encourage and support that, for me, is a third really important purpose of the work we do as educators. And we have to do the three together. We cannot make a choice and say, let's do only this or that. These three are always on the table. And therefore, it really helps to know that these three are there. And I would say that this last one, where we understand that ultimately we are interested in the freedom of our students to lead their own lives well, that I think brings it all together.
Thank you. When we talked before this this session, we discussed the difference between useful and really useful knowledge. So maybe you can explain that a little bit more, because
Yes,
they both sound good, right? Useful, really useful. What's the difference? But there's a critical difference.
absolutely. It's a beautiful idea that comes from 19th century, workers' emancipation, where they said, yes, in schools and also in the workplace, we get a lot of useful knowledge that helps us to do our jobs well, to live our lives well. But you can say it's always just knowledge that tells us how to act in the situation here and now. But they said what we actually want is not just useful knowledge, but what they called really useful knowledge, where they said it's critically important that we understand the bigger picture, that as laborers, we do not just know how to do our job, but that we also understand why some people have very nice and well-paid jobs and other people need to do the dirty work. So you can say it has to do with political understanding. And that's tremendously important when you believe that education has something to do with emancipation, democracy, equality. Then you need to have that bigger picture. And I find it so nice to have this phrase, useful knowledge sounds good. But what is actually the really useful knowledge we need in democratic societies?
I think that skill is going to be so important, because I know later this morning we're going to be talking about the huge risks, in a democracy when you have disinformation, misinformation, where it's just so easy for people to get lost and confused by all of this. So this key message, the really useful knowledge, it helps you question the system and why the world is organized in that way. And that critical thinking is sort of the key immunization against a lot of the disinformation that will be put out there.
Yeah, it's tremendously important in relation to that we keep asking questions and not just believe all the information there is, and help each other to do that. And you can say that is really useful because that forms the basis for living together well in a democratic way. But we see all kinds of forces that very quickly try to undermine that.
Thank you. And just a reminder to the audience, in a little bit, I'll be opening the floor and taking your questions for Gert. So please put your questions in the comments in whatever platform you're watching this on. So let me now ask, how do we ensure that we can keep humanism at the heart of education? I know that's another passion of yours, making sure that we keep the sort of human dimension of the way that we create it, that there's an empathy and a human connection behind all of the policies and processes we put in place?
A very big question, but for me, it's one of these questions we need to keep asking, even if it's a difficult one and there isn't an easy answer to it. Humanism has to do with the dignity of human beings, with the worth of human beings. And human beings are fantastic beings. As I said, we have freedom, and freedom is both a gift, but it's also a burden, because it means that we need to make decisions about how to go forwards in our lives. But we constantly create systems, you could say, and we create these systems to help us. But very often these systems then become counterproductive, and they begin to undermine what we're trying to do. I think the whole discussion about artificial intelligence that I just picked up a bit about is such an example where you can say, yeah, computers do fantastic things, but now all these systems are running out of hand. We're losing control over them, and that really undermines, you can say, that our humanity. So to preserve that, it comes back to asking, you can say, the really difficult questions, and not falling for shiny promises. There's a lot of talk about AI. I tend to think that the A for AI is not artificial intelligence, but first of all, it's average intelligence. And I think someone else also commented on that. Everything you get from artificial intelligence is just the average of everything that exists. And average intelligence is not very intelligent, you could say. The other thing is AI is also adaptive intelligence. It's very good to adapt and adjust, but what computers are not able to do is to say no when we need to say no. And there you can say is another possibility to preserve the humanism, that as human beings, we're not just adaptive organisms. We have the capacity to say no, and that's a really important thing to do. And many of these systems lack precisely that ability to say, no, this is not right, we should do something different.
Thank you. I wonder if you could give some insight into the challenge of how we make sure that education is world-based, it's externally facing to the kinds of environments that learners and adults need to deal with, rather than very curriculum-based, where you're being taught this is the skills you need to have. It's a tick box exercise. Once it's done, you go. Because obviously the policy pressure will be to say, we've got a big target. We want to get 75% of all 30-year-olds to have had 3 hours of training. So you have this sort of pressure to create a very systematized, routine process. How do we make sure that education is more open to the world and moves beyond just this narrow curriculum?
Yeah, that's very good. That's also a little plug for this book called World-Centered Education, indeed, which actually I call A View for the Present, because so much talk about education is always talking about the future. It says in so many years we need this and that, but we live in the here and now, and as educators we work in the here and now, and we need to have an orientation for the work we do there. And then you can see in discussions about education, on the one hand, there is this big push to say the curriculum is the priority. Yeah, we define all the learning outcomes or all the skills or the competencies, and we just need to get that into our students. And then there is often a response that says, no, the student should be in the center, student-centered, child-centered education. They should decide what they want to learn, and then we have wonderful education. I think these are two opposite views that only give half of the picture. Because of course we need a curriculum. Education is about something. Of course, it is for the sake of students. But you can say, why do we bring students and curriculum together? Because we want to prepare and encourage students to live their life in the world. And the world is a pretty difficult place, quite often. So to prepare them well and to encourage them that they want to live their life in that world, in the physical world, but also in the social world, that's a really important task. So for me, that's already one way to say, never forget that the curriculum is a means to prepare and encourage our students. It's not an end in itself. But for policymakers, it can quickly become an end where you say, oh, so many people need to have so many hours of skills training. The other little thing is that I would say when we put the world in the center, we should not think that the world is a shop where we can just walk in and do what we want to do. If you look at the ecological crisis we are in, we have treated the world too long just as an object that we can take what we want from. But the world actually has its own integrity and puts limits and limitations on what we can want from it. And to get a sense of what these limits and limitations are is for me a really important task for education, something that we need to do together. And that for me is also the question of democracy, because democracy is also not a situation where everyone can just do what they want and get what they want. I often quote the Rolling Stones, you can't always get what you want. And for me, that's exactly what democracy is about. Of course, we care about the freedom of all human beings, but we know that that freedom is not unlimited. So we can put all our desires on the table, but the democratic work is then to see which of these desires can we carry collectively and which not. And for me, that's the difficult, you can say, encounter with the limits of the world. And for me, that's another really important reason to say we need to put this world much more in the center and give the world a voice, actually.
Okay, you also encourage educators to take risks in the way that they develop and deliver education. What do you mean by that, and what's the importance of taking risks?
Yes. Again, I actually wrote a little book called The Beautiful Risk of Education, because I think that in a lot of policy practice, risk is always seen as a negative thing, as something that we need to get under control. And of course, to a degree, that's correct. Yeah, we educate our students and we have ambitions and aims in minds, and not everything is fine. I don't want my dentist to be very creative, for example. I want my dentist to be very precise and skillful. And with driving lessons, we also all know there is a clear end that we're all working towards. But as I said before, education ultimately is about equipping and encouraging people for their own free life. And if we think that the best education is total control, then we sort of squeeze our students out of that process. So there needs to be a degree of risk where we say, yes, we put something on the table for our students, but they need to pick it up, and they will pick it up in very different ways. And then we have the conversation about that. So to see that this risk is actually essential for education, if we are interested in our students leading their own lives well, that is a very different way to look at risk. But that makes our work as educators also risky, because we do all kinds of things. We give our students, we open doors for our students. We say, look here, read that, study this. And sometimes they may say, well, that's not really what I like or what I was looking for. They might say, we want useful knowledge, whereas as adult educators, we might say, well, wait a minute, actually, we need to spend time on really useful knowledge. We need to work on the bigger picture. And that's quite difficult, because that requires some going back and forth where we also, take risks ourselves. But I think those risks are important so that education remains humane, you could say, is concerned about human beings and their freedom.
Let's pick up on something around this issue of attention, because we live in an environment, an attention economy, where the social media particularly is really monetized by how much time they get from you, how many eyeballs you've got watching anything at any time. So how does adult education help people pay attention to the right things, or move beyond systems of social media and other that are biologically designed to hijack your attention? They give you a
Yes.
dopamine rush. They essentially learn how to hack our brain, the way that our brain functions. So how do we give people the skills to be back in control of their own attention?
Yeah, I think you've put it beautifully. This is a big problem, that attention has become the big money maker of our time. And attention doesn't just hack our brain. I would also say it hacks our soul. It really goes to the very interiority of our existence. And what all this attention seeking does is that it tries to distract us. Quite often it tries to distract us so that we buy more. So there is a real economic imperative. But also populist politics works with the same mechanisms of distraction. For example, populist politicians will say, if you vote for me, I give you everything you want. Of course, that's a lie, but it sounds attractive if you are distracted to that. So you can say that as educators, we are in the middle of this whole battle for attention. And there, what I really like is to go back to the Greek word school, because in Greek, the word school, schole, means free time. Not free time in the sense of leisure time where you do what we want, but you can say actually time that we set free, that we make free. You could almost say time that we emancipate from this ongoing attention economy, so that we can pay attention to different things, to the bigger questions, to the questions that are not asked in the quick answers, attention economy. So there you can see that the really important work of education is to claim back some of this time so that we can attend to different things, but can even pay attention to where our own attention is going. Because, what social media do is constantly also making yourself forget what you're actually attending to and why you're doing that. So there, I think that to understand that the work of education is to reclaim the time so that we can pay a different attention to the bigger questions that many people want us just not to ask. There is really important educational work to do, I think. And therefore, the school is actually a beautiful idea.
Thank you. I love that idea of school being a place and a time of liberation, of emancipating time, so that we could, pay attention to the things that matter. We've got a question now that's come in on the platform, which is, what is the responsibility of educators facing the contemporary growing issues such as economic and social inequalities? And you mentioned that, the difference between useful and really useful knowledge is it helps us question, why is the world the way it is right now? And then what could we do to change that? So our question that's come from the audience asks us, okay, what's the role and responsibility of educators, given we live in an unequal world, in unequal societies, to both talk about that, but also challenge it?
Yes, it has a lot to do with that. So when you ask what's the responsibility of educators, these are realities we're living in, and often they are much bigger forces around us. But one thing to do is to name this. And again, this is the really useful knowledge, where you say, is economic inequality simply a law of nature? No, it's in the interest of some and not others. to make that visible, which you can call political literacy, you can say it's paying attention to what really matters. That's important educational work we can do. Therefore, as educators, it also begins to raise the question, where are we in relation to society? Because as educators, we have a tendency to do the best for our students and to always say yes to any question that comes to us. Beautiful book from a French educator, Philippe Mérieux, who says, as educators, we also have a duty to resist. We have a duty to say no, to push back. For example, to push back to a society that only wants us to have a useful role, and to say, look, our duty as educators is to ask the difficult questions, is to claim the space and the time to go back to what matters for our human life together. And I think there's somewhere we find our responsibility to do that, which is tough.
Thank you. When you were doing the research to write your books, what did you find the most inspiring or surprising when you started to look at the way that adult educators are working and planning their approach?
I think what I find depressing is that adult education is under so much pressure. When you look from a policy angle, there is this constant pressure to be useful, functional. You see an enormous narrowing of the funds that are available for lifelong learning, for example, very much linked to employability, or rather instrumental social cohesion agendas, maybe. What encourages me is that there are still people who, despite these difficulties, keep believing in education, keep struggling for education, and on the ground just get on with it in local community centers, in study groups. So what gives me, I think, still the encouragement and the optimism is that there are people who know that this work matters, that we need to remain thoughtful and need to help each other there. And that dimension of adult education, is still surviving and in a sense flourishing, but often despite policy rather than because of policy. That's the real difficulty.
Thank you, Gert. I mean, I know you're talking to the passionate part of the community on our EPALE community platform, and we know that people are really committed to it. We've had another question. How do we highlight the conscious engagement with informal learning for a broad understanding of society?
I would love to know a bit more about that question, but I don't know how we can do that. Informal learning for me is about educational activities that happen outside of systems, outside of systems is the best way to put it. You can say there is an awful lot of learning going on, in a sense we're learning all the time, but the real question is to turn that learning into education. You can say and sit down and look at what are we learning and what should we be learning. And that for me is conscious engagement. Again, society goes very fast and pulls us in all kinds of directions. And to stop that and say, wait a minute, I think that's an important educational endeavor. And we need that for society, not just to become a big machine that's running behind itself.
Thank you. I wonder, you at times in our conversation, you've seen both optimistic and pessimistic, but looking forward, from my point of view, we've been talking about skills for 30 years or longer, but it's never been more prominent in conversations in political messaging. So looking forward, are you optimistic that as part of this conversation about skills and learning, that there is an opportunity to invest in and promote and support the informal learning, the adult learning sector, which has traditionally been the less prestigious and the sort of Cinderella of the learning community?
I think I should say that I'm optimistic, and for the reasons that I just mentioned, because this work is still going on, and there are people who know that this matters. But policy has a tendency to quickly transform that into something else. Not often out of bad intentions, but that's just how policy tends to work. Maybe the most important thing that I'll also like to do is to really be mindful of the language we use. So something like skills for the future sounds good, but when you begin to ask what are we actually talking about, we always project it towards a future, and you can ask, but what about the now? But skills always also looks at what do people need to have. Whereas you can say maybe the biggest question is, how do we develop a sensitivity for the questions that really matter? So a sensitivity for the presence, for me, would be a way to not project everything in the future and think of it as, if we get the skills, then we get a better future. But to say, can we help each other to stay aware of what's happening in the here and now, and what the issues are that really require our attention. And if we manage to do that, that would give me optimism. If we can have a really good, critical, ongoing conversation about what should matter.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask just one last question, and perhaps it's a bit unfair to ask this and ask you to reply in 2 minutes, but you've talked about the sort of liberation of time that comes through adult education. And given that we've got a rise of populism and authoritarian leadership in many countries in Europe and beyond, is there a risk that adult education is seen as therefore dangerous because it encourages people to think and ask questions and put a critical lens to the world outside? Is there a risk that adult education is either cut or reduced or gets less priority because it has that larger global humanist approach?
Yes, I can really imagine that from some perspectives, the work that's happening in adult education is seen as dangerous and subversive. And you can say that precisely shows that it's doing something important, because if people are finding it dangerous from a kind of authoritarian perspective, then you can say it shows that it's really hitting a nerve. But that's the situation we are in, and I think to help each other to understand that we are not doing it just for our own fun, but we're doing it because it matters for a very different future than some of these futures that think that asking these difficult questions should actually not be happening. That, I think, helps to see what we are doing. But I can imagine that for some policymakers, they would say, why would we invest money in that if it's not useful? And there again, we need to be able to talk differently and say, well, there are things that are directly useful, but what if we no longer spend money on the future of the democratic quality of our human existence? That would be a scandal, I think.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Gert, for spending time with us this morning. It was a really exciting and interesting conversation, and we opened the big questions, and we explored the risks, the dangers, the potential for change. It was really, I hope, inspiring for our audiences, as they are people who are really engaged in, using this concept of schooling and learning as liberation, mental liberation, and seeing the world differently. So thank you very much, Gert, for starting our day off in the right way.
Okay, thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you very much. Now, we're going to now connect to another NSS. We already said hello to our colleagues in Finland, and now we're going to be moving to Central Europe. We're going to be saying hello to colleagues in Zagreb in Croatia, and just get a sense of what they're doing. Hello, Onyen.
Hello. Good morning from Zagreb. Good morning from Croatia. Can you hear me?
I can hear you and I can see you.
Oh, I'm glad. So, hello to you. Hello to all the conference participants. So, what we have planned here today is, I think, quite an interesting program. Since the topic of this year's conferences are skills for future, we will start with, I think, interesting lecture on digital economy and artificial intelligence. And in the second part of our event, since this is, after all, a community conference, we wanted to bring together representatives of adult education community in Croatia for this event. And we will have a roundtable. Participants will discuss opportunities for adults to take part in education for free through a new voucher system. And I think this will be really both interesting and relevant. This is more or less what we have planned for today. We would just like to wish both you and everyone else successful and pleasant remainder of the conference, and goodbye from Zagreb.
Thank you. Let's have a wave, everyone. Have a great day in Zagreb, and thank you very much for showing us your audience and what an amazing program you have for today. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
So now let's move on. And we promised at the beginning of the day that we were going to explore what happens for democracy. And we've heard from Gert, our first speaker, about the really useful knowledge that comes through adult education. It gives you a chance to question the world you see around you. And our next panel will help us explore what that means for elections, how we manage disinformation and democracy. So let me introduce to you, I have Simona Petkova, who is a policy officer for the European Commission in DG Education and Culture. I have Giovanni Zagni, on the executive board of the European Digital Media Observatory, EDMO. I have Edith Hammer, the program specialist at the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning. And I have Alice Stolmeyer, the founder and executive director of Defend Democracy. So welcome to you all. And what a banging start to the day we've had, really opening up some big questions. Let me start with you, Simona. Just give us a picture. We mentioned already that next June is one of the few really big exercises in democracy in the world. I think only India has a bigger democratic process in terms of numbers. So it's a huge exercise. And we have this appointment with direct democracy every 5 years. But there are risks involved, and not least the emergence of technology and the heavy involvement of state actors, non-state actors, commercial actors with their own agendas. So tell us a little bit about what's going to happen and what you can do to help understand trust and disinformation.
Good morning, Tamsin. Good morning to my fellow panelists. Good morning to our audience online. I hope you hear me well. It's really a pleasure to be here today. Indeed, next June, we have the European elections where Europeans across the 27 EU member states will go and give their vote for the Europe they would like to see in the next 5 years. And this is 400 million people. And actually, in 4 member states, we have 16-year-olds voting as well. So already the democratic participation starts early on in the middle adolescence. So as you rightly pointed out, we are now in times that are quite challenging in quite a few aspects. We have increase of disinformation. We had the pandemic, the energy crisis, the war in Ukraine, most recently further tensions in the last few weeks. So it's a lot really happening, and it's good for us to take into consideration that this has an impact on the way Europeans think of democracy, their attitudes, their trust in the different actors in the ecosystem. And at European level, we're looking into a lot of different sources of and studies to trace these attitudes, and to better understand, leading to the elections more broadly, also in the context of the digital decade that we're working towards by 2030 in terms of the digital transformation. And disinformation, media literacy levels are an issue, and the overall trust in media is an issue. Maybe just to mention a few examples in terms of the Eurobarometer that has been launched earlier this year. We have 36% of the Europeans trust media, even though the sense of democracy in Europe is strong. The trust in media is really, unfortunately, declining. Even more so when we look at disinformation, more than 8 in 10 of the Europeans actually are concerned about the implications of disinformation for democracy. And the issue is that many of them, around actually 75%, encounter often disinformation, and they realize that and they report that. This is really concerning. And as part of this study, we also see that the youngest respondents between 15 and 24, so actually some of those who would vote, are least concerned about these issues among all age groups. And it is quite concerning, because this is the generation that is born and raised in the digital age. We consider them digital natives. We somehow think that if they spend so much time online, they have the reflex to engage critically with the online world, which is not the case. This requires development of digital literacy, media literacy, early on the development of these democratic skills for navigating in the digital age. So this is a little bit the background against which the elections will take place next year, and it's really important to consider further actions and to reinforce our work into the development of democratic skills to address these challenges. After all, this year is the European Year of Skills. I'm sure this was mentioned multiple times already in the conference, but it's really important to put the focus on the human capital development, not only for the labor market, but of course for the citizenship engagement, because this is really the most forward-looking tool we have in our hands.
Thank you, Simona. Giovanni, let me bring you up, because we heard from the Eurobarometer survey that a lot of people are worried about disinformation, and half of them are seeing it regularly. I know I've seen it in my newsfeed. So, what's the role that fact-checking can do to try and counteract this sea of disinformation and misinformation that we are submersed in?
Thank you for your question. I hope, can you hear and see me well? I'm at an internet conference, but internet sometimes not very stable here. So, but anyway, so fact-checking. I think that one interesting thing about fact-checking is that very often it is not extremely clear what fact-checking cannot do before we can talk about what it can do. And what it cannot do is to be the cure to all the diseases, in some sense, not to be kind of silver bullet that solves all the problems, because we tend to kind of think about fact checking about the thing that can solve it all, and when it doesn't, when we see that there is that disinformation, misinformation continues to be out there, we then think, well, then fact checking is not working. But I think that we are thinking about fact-checking kind of in the wrong way. It is a little bit as thinking that since there still are fires, then firefighters are not useful. We should abolish them because buildings are still catching up in flames. So I think that fact-checking can do 3 things. One thing is to help people that have doubts. So for a lot of people, they do not have doubts about what they see and read online. I hope that this is still kind of a minority, but for some, they have in some sense they're established and solid truths, and they do not need anyone to tell them if something is wrong or not. But for other people, and I think it's a lot of people, they still have doubts about pieces of content that they see online or they encounter in their daily experience. For example, the other day I was listening to a podcast, and this podcast was referring to this picture of a Israeli general that was taken out of his home in his pajamas, and they were commenting this picture and say, "Oh, the attack really caught Israel by surprise. But kind of like a few hours later, I saw that this was actually a piece of disinformation that was circulating online, because that famous video of a Israeli general is actually taken in a completely different context. It's come from Nagorno-Karabakh a few weeks ago. So if you have doubts and you notice something and you have the doubt about if it is true or not, then fact-checking can really help you. Fact-checking websites are the places where these pieces of disinformation and misinformation are debunked. Now, of course, if you don't have doubts and you don't go to those websites, you will never encounter that that was false information. So that is one thing that it can really do. The second thing is to give context, and that is especially true of political fact-checking. Now, I'm really convinced that there are actually two kinds of fact-checking that are really different one from the other. One is political fact-checking and one is debunking. But for example, for political fact-checking, what they do is not to fact-checking is not there to be the arbiter of truth and to say this politician is a liar or this party is the one you shouldn't vote for. What it can do is to provide context to the claims that were made publicly by politicians. Then at the end of the day, we also put verdicts at the end of the article, but that is kind of only a label, something that is useful for in this time of quick communication on the internet. People don't have the time to read 15 paragraphs about something, and so we slap a label at the end of the article. But the point is really the fact check. The point is are really those 10 paragraphs, where we provide context and we explain why those things are true or not. And finally, I think that fact checking is crucial because it is a useful bridge to media literacy. Literally, what everything that fact checking is media literacy skills put into practice. If it is a good fact check, it is an article that explains what we did, what fact checkers did to arrive to the conclusion that that piece of content is not true, and that is literally like showing how what is media literacy every day. And so in that sense, I think that fact checking can do these three things, cannot be the solution to all the problems.
Thank you. So it's useful, but it's not the silver bullet. It's not the only answer that we use. And that's extremely helpful to say it's about giving context, debunking, and fact checking. And I think that's really useful. I mean, I'm originally from the UK, and at the moment it's what we call party conference season. And there's a brilliant interview clip where they made a claim at the Conservative Party conference that the opposition, that if they win the election, they're going to put a tax on meat, which is complete nonsense. Nobody's ever proposed it. But then the journalist asked a Conservative MP 5 times in a row to explain where this nonsense came from. And 5 times they were unable to do it because it was just an absolute nonsense. So this is a classic, fact checking. It's the role of the media. That's what they do. Let me bring Alice in now, because your organization, Defend Democracy, you've got direct experience of working in communities, sometimes in quite sort of dangerous and very tense situations. You build awareness of threats to democracy. Can you give us a sense? We've heard, how fact-checking is a piece of the picture, but it's not the only answer. What works well and what doesn't if we want to support citizens in this complex media environment? Sorry, we'll unmute you if that's not happened yet. Are you unmuted on your side? There we go.
I am now, yes.
Good, okay, great, let's go ahead.
Yes, good morning from Brussels. Yes, thank you for the question, and thank you also, Giovanni, for telling us more about fact-checking and how it's not the silver bullet. Yes, so my organization, Defend Democracy, has for that very reason developed a training called Act on Disinfo, in which we do not focus on fact-checking, but kind of try to paint the broader picture of our broken information space and the multiple problems that we have online, but also potential solutions for that. And one thing that is really key for any social media or digital platform users to understand is that all of the, let's say, partial solutions that are out there, like media literacy, digital literacy, fact-checking, debunking, providing context, it's all important and we should definitely not stop doing it. But what is often overlooked is that all these partial solutions are kind of addressing only the rational part of our brain. And we like to see ourselves as rational actors, but we're not. We are social creatures, we are emotional creatures. Our brains process information in certain ways. So what plays a big role, especially in an information space where we are bombarded with information like 24/7 per day, and our brains were not built for this, is that we often engage with content from our emotions. So before we even get to the stage of like verifying where a picture or a video comes from, or whether or not something was actually true, or what was the source of something, was it like a real journalism, high quality standard news company, or was it some blog? So all of these questions mostly pop up only later, but especially in an environment where you have so much information, and when you are triggered emotionally, then often you have already engaged with the content, and very often unintentionally you have helped amplify that very content that so upsets you, or which kind of confirms your prior beliefs. So this is what our training Act on Disinfo focuses on, is that we need to become more mindful social media users, and to, whenever you are triggered by something emotionally, and be aware that both propaganda and the algorithms of platforms are designed to trigger your emotions, then it's precisely the time to just sit back and not engage, and be more mindful. And that's the main lesson of our training.
And I know that you've, in the 2021 Dutch elections, you were involved in a social media watchdog. What were the lessons that you learned from that experience?
Well, I think one of the key, first of all, we were kind of shocked to see that in a democratic country like the Netherlands, there was so much organized campaigns to manipulate information. And again, our focus was not on fact-checking or what is true or false, but to kind of expose what is, let's say, organized behind the scenes to manipulate or to extort, to twist reality and certain facts. And I would say one key lesson for other projects in the future is that it really helps to kind of try to show and expose that in real time. So while it is also important to do more elaborate research and digging and then come up with like more extensive reports after the election, we precisely focused on trying to give something useful to the broader audience in the lead up to the election and while we were waiting for results, because this made people aware of like, look, there's this account claiming to be a politician, but actually it's part of several fake accounts. And when they try to stir up controversy and emotions, don't fall for it.
Thank you, Alice. And just for the audience, we're starting to share some links with you on the chat and across the social media. So the report from Alice's organization about the results of the social media campaigns and the Dutch elections, and also the materials on fact checking from Edmo we've been sharing with you, but to sort of help you use some of these tools that we're talking about. And thank you. We've got a message that we put up on the screen. Completely agree with Alice. We need more critical thinking. Let me now turn to Edith, because we've been talking up until now about things like fact checking, trying to make sure we understand when things are not true. But if we move beyond media literacy to the broader set of skills for democratic participation, what can you tell me about the work that you're doing?
Hello, good morning. Thank you. You can hear me already, right? Okay, good. Yes, thank you also for Alice and the previous speakers for raising these points about fact-checking and misinformation and fake news. And one important point is certainly that from research, we can see that social media and online discourses do not necessarily completely change people's political attitudes and political tendencies, but that they people, based on their already pre-existing attitudes, choose particular platforms where they gather information, where they inform themselves and take decisions. And that the social media then are more like amplifiers and or catalyst for driving people towards political extremes. So that's why we need to frame the discourse and media and information literacy within a broader framework of citizenship education and global citizenship education to already start with the education of these pre-existing political preferences. And so by definition, global citizenship and global citizenship education refers to a sense of belonging to a broader community and a common humanity. And UNESCO has been very much promoting this concept. It is also included in the Sustainable Development Goals in Target 4.7. Global citizenship emphasizes the interdependencies and interconnectedness that exists between local, national, and global issues. And considering that online and social media spaces transcend national borders, this understanding of how local communities and their particular challenges are interrelated becomes more and more important to have that kind of understanding. And embedding media and information literacy within a broader framework of citizenship education can really help people to develop the skills to analyze inequalities in society, to reveal and confront existing power structures that are also discriminating certain groups of the population. It helps people to appreciate, to learn to appreciate difference and multiple identities, and to develop their skills for critical inquiry, problem solving, negotiation, for taking personal and social responsibility. And so ultimately, I would say global citizenship education is really about fostering values of fairness, of social justice. And this, again, is at the very heart of democracy as we speak about it. In times where we can see a weakening in democratic governance and also a rise in populism and exclusionary nationalist movements, we can see that in Europe, but also in other parts of the world, this kind of education and understanding, and not only, and I like that, Alice, thanks for making the point, not only the cognitive understanding, but also the emotional and behavioral competences of global citizenship become really more and more important. And the point that I would like to make also from the side of our work at the Institute, UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, is that global citizenship education cannot be confined to the walls of classrooms. It is citizenship and active citizenship is not something that exists. It is something that is learned through practice and through experience, and that also attitudes change over time. And so this needs to be a lifelong process, and it needs to include formal but also non-formal learning environments. And while there is a lot of materials and there is substantial policy also integrating citizenship education in school curricula, we can see much less of that when it comes to adult education. And particularly, we can see less coordinated approaches. There are very good initiatives, excellent initiatives by NGOs, but there is not so much coordinated action and policy action. It was maybe even a bit shocking in the Grail 4 survey, in the global report on adult learning and education. In the survey in 2018, we could see that only 4% of countries reported progress in policy on citizenship education, which is very low number. The good thing is, in our last survey, the last Grail 5 was published last year, and in that survey it was actually 74% of countries that reported progress in developing and implementing policies for citizenship education. And so we can really see a growing interest also in the policy side, which is crucial to avoid scattered, singled out approaches, but to really make a larger impact and scale up action. And this has also been emphasized in the Marrakesh Framework for Action during Confintea 7.
Thank you, Edith. Simone, let me come back to you just to invite you to briefly tell us, what the Commission is doing to help underscore both digital and media literacy in the work of, for example, the Erasmus program.
Thanks a lot for this question. Indeed, a lot is being done across the Commission to promote media and digital literacy. On our side, I come from the Directorate General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture. So our role is to start the development of those skills as early as possible in the formal education, but of course in non-formal and in adult and lifelong learning. So on our side, being digitally literate and is an extremely important part of being a digital citizen in 21st century. It is one of the competencies that make part of the DigComp framework. So this EU widely adopted framework of what it means to be a digital citizen in 21st century. And this is a framework that has been adopted very regularly with reference to emerging needs, emerging skills. Already last March, it was updated with more examples related to disinformation, also critical thinking, but also artificial intelligence, for example, because we see also a bit of a divergence between the two topics in terms of artificial intelligence being used for the creation and dissemination of disinformation. Another angle through which we support the development of those skills is through very practical guidelines for teachers and educators. As part of the Digital Education Action Plan, exactly 1 year ago, on the 11th of October, the Commission launched guidelines for teachers and educators on tackling disinformation and promoting digital literacy. This is a very practical 35 pages document that was developed by an expert group, bringing together the teacher training community, the private sector, non-governmental organizations. Actually, we had representatives of EDMO, we had UNESCO as an observer. So it's really a document that came after a very intensive 1 year work of the group. And it includes a lot of definitions, concept demystification. It includes a lot of activity plans, practical examples, reflection even of this emotional aspect of disinformation. So it is, even though it's targeted at primary and secondary secondary. It can be very easily adapted also for adult education, non-formal use in libraries, for example. It's a very versatile document. It is translated in OE official languages, so it can be taken up by the community very, very quickly. And I highly recommend that. And from Erasmus Plus, maybe just last point to stress is that the digital transformation is a priority for the current Erasmus Plus program. It is horizontally very prominent across all calls. And in terms of grassroots projects on the topic of digital literacy and addressing disinformation, there has been a lot of interest from the community. Almost 400 projects were funded only in 2021. So it's really a topic that engages a lot of different stakeholders, and it really demonstrates the importance of working further in this regard. On our side, as a commission, we put additional emphasis where we can. For instance, in this year, there was forward-looking project call that had one of its priorities, teacher training and curriculum development in the topic. So additionally, we put even more spotlight and even more priority on projects in this field.
Thank you, Simona. I'm going to come to you, Alice, and we've had a couple of questions and comments from the audience, which I think are worth exploring. So we've got a question that says, you know, the problem is that people don't look at qualified sources. They're convinced that the people who provide information are either paid by George Soros or Bill Gates out to deceive the world. How do we get to them? And my question here is very much, you know, when people fall down that rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, and we saw it a lot during COVID-19, it's hard to reach them because they disbelieve any message that comes from authority. So how do we engage with them? And we had a great comment from Marion, who said that the cousin of fact checking is the ability to enter dialogue. Many people in Europe don't have the opportunity to join a dialogue, and this feeds into polarization and the crisis of democracy. So this is a lot of issues, Alice, for you to pick up, but this core issue that, you know, we talked about the emotional part of the brain. You can't counter emotions with facts. That's, you know, apples and pears. How do we engage with people when they've closed themselves off, they've gone down the rabbit hole? What do we do?
Yes, indeed. Yes, I think when people are kind of still at the beginning of the rabbit hole, they may still be open to, let's say, some more factual information, though of course you need to bring that in a way that doesn't say like, look, you're wrong and don't be so stupid. You know, bring it in a gentle way and like perhaps even like almost casual, like, hey, look, I came across this other information and maybe it interests you. But when they have gone down the rabbit hole, then it becomes a different situation. And I want to stress that I'm not an expert on conspiracy theories or extremism, but I do know, you know, whenever I have time to read about it or to watch or listen, I do know, and being a psychologist by background, I know how important it is that people feel they belong to a community. Into a group. And what you often see is that these conspiracy theorists, they are in their bubble, in their community, in their chat groups. And when you are, and it's very hard to leave. So it definitely not helps to say, look, you're ridiculous, or you're stupid, or you're wrong, or you're no longer my relative because whatever. So try to, however difficult it may be, but try to empathize and to be open and approach them with love and understanding, and perhaps try to offer them an alternative, like, because if it's hard to leave a group, then, you know, what's the alternative you have for them? Maybe there can be offline. And again, this is also something I would like to stress. It's we spend so much time online that it's very important that we also keep practicing our offline social skills. So maybe as a society, we should pay more attention also to offering offline community life. So to give people a sense of belonging and purpose. Yeah, that's maybe the main point I wanted to make.
Thank you. I think that's useful to essentially de-escalate the emotional tone that is created by polarization, because a lot of the disinformation that's put out there is designed to divide. It's
Exactly.
designed to trigger an emergency response,
Yes.
and it's very much linked to fear. And it's and the sort of weird twist in it is that it's often triggered by empathy, because people are concerned about their children, they're concerned about their neighbors, and these messages that they're given tell them that their friends, their neighbors, their community are under threat. And so it's a way of getting into their brains to trigger that sort of empathy response for themselves and their others that has been so hijacked by some of these disinformation messages. So that your answer is saying, look, don't get into a sort of polarizing war. Don't try and get into a my fact beats your fact business, but reach out, encourage a sense of belonging, use empathy to build bridges, and, to don't come at it as, with a direct confrontation, but, come at it perhaps sideways, find that bridge of something you've got in common, and then move forward. I'm seeing lots of members of the panel nodding, but is that roughly
maybe I can quickly mention, because
Yes.
I came across this while we were watching the Dutch elections. So actually UNESCO has done a great poster series on conspiracy theories, which is very helpful. So like, what do you say to someone, or how do you recognize it? What is conspiracy theories? And that was very useful.
Excellent. So we will share that resource with people in the link, so people are able to download that and use that. And we've also had a great comment from Jana, who said, look, bridges need to be built between the, quotes, mainstream information sources and those who distrust them, not just through traditional media, but also through education, community engagement. And I know that's at the heart of what the EPALE community does. I mean, I remember from previous conferences, activities that were run in libraries, in prisons, in all sorts of places, to just have conversations, to open up connections. So the sort of 135,000 people who are part of the EPALE community are exactly the right people to listen to this and say, we're here to create those bridges. Giovanni, let me invite you to come in. What are the disinformation trends that we need to be aware of? Because the technology is changing all the time. So it's no longer the very simple bots where you could see, what they were doing. It's getting much more sophisticated. So what should we be keeping an eye out?
So disinformation trends and narratives tend to follow closely what's in the news, and they tend to react in some ways to the main topic of a discussion that are in the mainstream media, if we want to call them that way. As EDMO, so the European Digital Media Observatory, we have established a network of roughly 50 fact-checking organizations across Europe that cover all member states, barring maybe Cyprus, if I'm not mistaken. And what we do, among other things, is that every month we circulate a questionnaire among the members of the network, and we ask what they've been seeing in terms of disinformation and misinformation trends and narratives in their countries. And what we find out, the results are published every month in as the so-called fact-checking briefs on EDMO's website. And what is interesting is that disinformation narratives are both, some of them are country specific. So you have different things that going on in different countries. For example, and there is quite a big divide between Central and Eastern Europe and Western Europe. This is something that we really need to take into account. So some of them, some of those narratives and trends are regional and even from a specific country. But another very interesting phenomenon is that some of them are also across Europe. So for example, there was a huge disinformation trend a few months ago around the idea that Europe was, the European Union intended to force people to eat insects. And that was something that was the focus of disinformation across Europe, really. Sometimes it was picked up by national politicians, but it was really a cross-border topic. So through the fact-checking briefs, we monitor that on a monthly basis, and we kind of summarize what we've seen in disinformation trends at the European level. Generally speaking, though, the most important thing to keep in mind is that aside from some big conspiracy theories that are kind of evergreens and travel across space and stay constant through the months, and they morph a little bit, but then the other main thing is that this information always come together with the main trends in mainstream information. That is some of the main things that we see every month.
Thank you. And you know what? I have been in conversations at European level where they talk about the future of food, and it's become very clear that we can no longer, from a climate perspective, keep eating the meat in the way that we do. And there are conversations where they say, yes, we need to start considering other protein sources. We maybe need to consider things like insects. So I could see how you could take that quote out of perspective and turn it into a headline. Europe says we must eat insects, and it's not true, but if it's taken out of context, I can genuinely say that there was a conversation at European level that said we should eat insects. So you say that there's often the disinformation has a seed of truth in it that's taken out of context. It's then manipulated and distorted, but it makes it hard to fact check, because when you go back, you actually find it's not nonsense. There was something there. So that's really interesting. Edith, let me bring you in, because we live in an incredibly fragmented digital environment. We no longer do things together. We no longer watch television together. We consume in our own little bubble. And yet a sense of community and a sense of belonging and shared purpose, what we all want to do together, requires common experience, common spaces in order to create shared stories and culture. Obviously, this is something that UNESCO was created to do, but how do you see us creating that connection and shared experience in this fragmented world?
Yes, thank you. Just to briefly mention, I think as Elisabetta will share the link, UNESCO has also published I think, very good guidance on addressing conspiracy theories. It's for teachers, but it can really be applied to different contexts. Yes, thank you for bringing up this question. My immediate answer would link to something Alice has said before, to strengthen local community life. I think this is really key. Because when we talk about global citizenship education and belonging to a global community, this can be quite abstract to people to relate this to their everyday lives. So it can certainly be easier to learn about and foster experiences of solidarity, of respect for diversity, democratic participation within their immediate environments, and to learn how these attitudes then connect to a global level. So as I mentioned before, citizenship education is really something that is created through the practice or through exercising citizenship. And when we look at the local level, for example, citizen forums can trigger processes of critical inquiry, of collective learning processes. And we have very good experiences of that from the UNESCO Global Network of Learning Cities that is coordinated by the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning. We are celebrating this year our 10th anniversary, and we have almost 300 cities in the network, and global citizenship education is one of the thematic areas that we work on. And we did a small-scale survey among those members that are strongly committed to citizenship education in 2020. And there we could see that there's a broad range of topics, obviously, but also a broad range of stakeholders involved, from the local governments themselves to universities, training institutes, adult education institutions, very importantly, community learning institutions, and NGOs, and bringing all of these different stakeholders together to foster the kind of dialogue and to offer learning opportunities is really key. And we have a lot of good examples from our member cities, organizing citizen cafes, organizing youth councils or councils for the elderly. And through that, young people, but also older people, can learn to engage in debate and to be confronted with opposing views. And this is at the end, at the very bottom of lifelong learning. You learn because your previous perceptions are distorted in a way, and you need to react. And so I think this local level is really, really key to fostering democratic processes.
Thank you very much. We're coming to the end of the time together on this panel, which has been really exciting. But I'd like to ask you all to give us 1 or 2 sentences of advice, because how do we prepare for the European elections? What are the priorities that we should do to make sure that we've got a really democratic process happening in June next year? So who would like to start me off? What's the best advice? How to prepare to make sure that we don't get flooded by disinformation or misinformation? Alice, let me start with you.
Okay, well, as I said previously, it's very important to be mindful. And that means that whenever you feel that you are triggered emotionally, stop and step back. Like, don't respond, don't amplify, don't boost, not even to say that this is ridiculous or whatever, because it unintentionally you will help amplify the very information that so upsets you. So stop and step back, and then and visit our website to see some practical tips and tricks on how not to feed the trolls and how not to feed the algorithm and how not to feed the brain. And then perhaps one more thing in line with today's topic, digital developments are going so fast that it's very hard to keep up with them. And it's something that we as a society, we need to try. And definitely this is not just for the younger or the older generation, but it's for everyone. So let's try to help each other to stay on top of the developments, how hard that may be, and a call to our politicians to really start treating digital platforms like critical infrastructure, because they are, and they're not just important for our democracies, but also for our security.
Thank you. Simona, what advice would you give?
I think my advice is very much in the same vein as Alice's. I think it's really important to highlight to European citizens that they should stay informed, that they should be very critical to what they read online, but they should also be constructive. This should be a constructive criticism. So don't get dissuaded or discouraged or decide not to vote. Go and express your democratic right. Just go fact check. We discussed about fact checking. Go check the resources. Be aware of the overall dynamics online. And indeed, this emotional aspect should be also very closely taken into consideration.
Thank you. Edith.
Well, I very much echo what has been said already. And maybe to add to that, I think it will be important to convince people of all ages that this is really a very important point in time where they can exercise their rights and duties as citizens, and to convey the importance of how they can influence what is happening in Europe. And for that, I would call on also local governments and local stakeholders to organize these kind of small-scale initiatives that bring people together, that show them how democratic processes work, because I think an understanding of how it works in a small local environment can really help to understand how these democratic processes work at a larger scale.
Thank you. Giovanni.
So my advice is simply put to prepare a toolkit for the elections and for how you inform yourself. First thing is to choose carefully your sources of info. You don't need to choose 100. There are plenty of great content out there. You can choose the newsletters, the podcasts, the websites that you prefer, but just choose a couple and kind of stick with them. Second, try and learn a couple of very simple verification procedures. In reverse image search is something that is super useful, super easy to do, and yet a lot of people are not sure about how to do that. And finally, find a few projects that can help you verify. Can be fact-checking websites, can be more institutional ones. So your terms of reference for bad information. Find some places that can help you find if what you are reading is kind of true or not, and can be also people. So if you have a friend or a nephew that is very tech savvy that you trust, then whenever you encounter something you have doubts on, just forward it to them and they can help you.
Thank you very much, panel. You've given us loads of really practical advice just for individuals and also for educators and institutions. So be mindful, stay informed and be critical, be engaged, act. Don't become passive about it. Don't feed the trolls or the algorithm or the sort of part of the brain they want to do it. Make sure you confront yourself with opposing views to check your own mind. Sort of identify now your sources of verification. Learn some basic tools like reverse image search or others. Find the debunking sites because these are all the ones to look at. For organizations and institutions, look at creating toolkits, and particularly Edith's message about at local areas. Find places to bring people together at small scale to create that belonging, that opportunity to share so that people don't get lost in their small little divisions. Find ways of bringing together to create that shared understanding and that shared sense of purpose and challenge. So panel, you've given us loads of great advice. Lots of concerns to be aware of, and certainly some things we would need to keep an eye on. But thank you very much to Edith, to Giovanni, to Alice, and Simona for joining us on this great panel and helping us to explore it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks a lot.
So it was a great discussion. And at the beginning of the day, I promised we would talk about disinformation. I promised we would talk about the elections and how adult education fits into that broader picture of life skills and of citizenship issues. And I hope you agree, we've had a really engaging and interesting discussion. Lots of insights and areas, perhaps new areas of technology or disinformation trends that we were not aware of. And now we've given you some tools, some tips, and some tricks. And keep this conversation going. The EPALE platform is a great place to share some of your ideas. We heard from Simona how many new projects are being funded at EU level, looking at how to tackle or identify disinformation. So there will be resources for you on the platform that will help you build a curricula, a program for the work that you're doing, because it's very clear to me from the conversation we had with Gert, our keynote speaker, just how important the role of adult education is in providing useful information and very useful information. And the very useful information is how to question the world, how to understand what you're seeing around it, how to understand your place in it, and then how to be active and engaged and to be the subject of your own life. So I think we've had a really good conversation about today's ideas and thinking, and highlighting again the enormous value of adult education. And we had this, he reminded us that the Greek origin of the word school is around emancipation and freedom, as in free time. not as in free time to sit and read a book or to sort of watch a TV program, but free time, free for your mind to do something different. And we had another comment from somebody who said, hey, that should be on, that we should embroider that on cushions, put it on mugs, put it on pins, get that message out that schooling, education is freedom. So thank you very much for your very active engagement. We really enjoy that. That's why we have the community conference, is to have a chance to hear from you and have you contribute to our conversations. And to that end, we have a survey that we're going to be putting out for you. We want to hear from you. We know we've got 135,000 users out there, but are we delivering what you need in the way that you need? Is there anything else we could do better? And of course, there are a few questions about this conference in that survey. Now, we've kept it simple. You should be able to do it in less than 5 minutes, but we would love to hear from you to see how we can make sure the EPALE platform meets your needs and your ideas and is a vehicle for you to share more in the community that is very vibrant on adult learning. Just a couple of other points to remind you: the hashtag Bloom with EPALE and European Year of Schools. If you were inspired by today, if you were provoked by today, don't feed the trolls, but do feed us on the social media with your ideas and what you picked up and what you'd like to take away. That's really helpful for us. It gives us an idea of how the information we've provided to you lands with you and how you can use it. Just to let you know that we have another conference day tomorrow morning with more conversation and going further. There is a workshop that is already full. There's no chance to join it, but for those of you who did inscribe for it, it's the Skills for Citizenship, Democratic Education for Democratic Society. I'm sure they'll be taking these ideas and going even deeper. That's from 11:45 to 1 o'clock. Thank you all for participating. It was another great day, and I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Thank you and goodbye.